Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. So on this video, I'm going to review on a paper entitled A Systematic Review on Distributed Databases System and Their Techniques. So these are the content of this presentation. Who has have done the work? What were their goals and objectives? What were the research questions, if any? What were their methods in terms of but not limited to? How have they gathered relevant data? How is the data gathering set up? What are the tools techniques used in data gathering? And how do they form the data set and how do they clean the data? And how do they process that data? The next is what were their findings? What were the gaps in their studies and findings? And the last one is what are your takeaways on this paper? So first is we're going to to show that the the person behind this work. So who has have done the work? So this paper is done by Gatembo Kitota Icheli, PhD scholar on the Department of Computer Science and Engineering, Sharda University, Greater Noida in India. And also Shrikant, Professor Research and Technology Development Center at Sharda University, Greater Noida, India. And last but not the least is Rochi Agarwal, Associate Professor, Department of Computer Applications, GIMS Engineering Management Technical Campus, Greater Noida, India. So what were their goals and objectives? So their goals is to achieve an effective solution to maintain consistency in homogeneous distributed databases architecture in full migration toward peer-to-peer or P2P environment. And objective is to review previous work focusing on published literature between 2008 to 2017 by highlighting their strengths and weaknesses. So the research question is distribution strategies and some problems encountered when designing and using distributed database. Number two, as data or relations become fragmented, the next step is to allocate these fragments to sites. So what the problems in strategies when allocating this data into different sites? In the last question is highlighting strengths and weaknesses given by the previous literature with the aim of achieving an effective solution to maintain consistency in homogeneous distributed databases architecture in full migration towards peer-to-peer environment. So what were their methods in terms of but not limited to? How have they gathered relevant data? How is the data gathering set up and what are the tools techniques used in data gathering? So in this paper, literature review has been conducted on a distributed databases and their techniques. So this paper review previous work focusing on published literature between 2008 to 2017 and the tools and techniques used are highlighting their strengths and weaknesses with the aim of achieving an effective solution to maintain consistency in homogeneous distributed databases architecture in full migration towards peer-to-peer environment. So how would they form the dataset? So this paper review previous work focusing on published literature between 2008 to 2017, and the structure of the remainder of this paper is organized as follows. Apart from section 1, which is devoted to the introduction, section 2 reviews of general literature about the distributed database design techniques or strategies in issues encountered in design and the usage of distributed databases and possible solution which already exists, was section 3 propose the new model of synchronization through the replication process. And finally 4, they conclude the study. So how they clean the data? So they clean the data by organizing the information into several categories. So those literature reviews, skimming, reading, and interpretation. So how did they process the data? This literature review is organized as follows. The first unit A discussed the distributed database design techniques and strategies used, while the second unit B discusses the issues encountered in the design and utilize the distributed database. So what were their findings? So for the first question, distribution strategies and some problems encountered when designing and using distributed database. So distribution strategies and some problems encountered when designing and using distributed database have been pointed out, and these problems have been conducted based on respectively three distribution strategies: the data fragmentation, data allocation, and data replication. So as the data relation become fragmented, the next step is to allocate these fragments to sites. What the problem and strategies when allocating this data into different sites? So the findings is, since the data relations become fragmented, the next step is to allocate these fragments to sites. So those data allocation is also another particular problem which involves finding the optimal distribution of the best distribution of fragments or data subtables into sites. So this has already been proved to be the NP-complete problem. Its solution consists of the heuristic method. So during this study, the review of some heuristics that yield suboptimal solutions have been done. Unfinished as fragments or who relations have been in certain cases to exchange data among them, and the data replication, which is the unique strategy to manage this procedure, has been studied in its famous synchronization algorithm. So the last question is highlighting the strengths and weaknesses given by the previous literature with the aim of achieving an effective solution to maintain consistency in homogeneous distributed databases architecture in poor migration towards peer-to-peer environment. So this work from others in the sense that it set itself as a goal to completely review the literature and distributed database system in order to find out if existing distribution approaches remain effective when in full migration to peer-to-peer networks. Focusing first on replication, it has been found that existing replication approaches are not appropriate for supporting application on a P2P network. Thus, it has been proposed new replication approaches adapted to the peer-to-peer network. So those are the findings on this on that research questions. So the next is, what were the gaps in their studies or findings? So the researcher aimed to develop a complete distributed database management system independent algorithm in which it will be presented step-by-step scenarios to synchronize database tables in their next work. So in this paper, they didn't yet reach their aim, which is the modern peer-to-peer in distribution and distributed database system. So it will be implemented as a prototype in a general interface user as a mediator distributed database management system to attempt to reach the aim of modern peer-to-peer and distributed database system. So for the last content of this presentation, so what are your takeaways on this paper? So my takeaways on this paper is it is really hard to manage a large amount of data. So that's why we need to distribute that data. We need to fragment that data into subtables or subrelations and distribute it on a different site. And upon distributing that data, there's also some issues behind the distribution of that data. The level of distribution, the level of access patterns on how we distribute that data. And on each site, or should we replicate uh, all of the data on each site, store all of the data on each site? So there is a big problem when it comes to distribution of data to maintain its credibility, because in some way, when our data is already distributed, it's hard for us to uh, uh, make an update for that data when we store replicate our data on each site. So when we do an update for that data on one side, we should also do an update on the other side. So those are the problems in data replication or distribution. And also designing the computer networks, because it's not just involves on data distribution, but also the distribution of a computer network or network design. So that is my takeaways on this paper. So that's all for this video presentation on systematic review on distributed database system and their techniques. So that's all for my presentation.